With our first question for all of our panelists to kick us off. And the question is, why is it important for people to care about how diverse and inclusive their events are? And anyone can start. And just remember to turn on your mic.
I'll get started talking from the nonprofit perspective, but at Lumina Alliance, when we're hosting an event, we have two primary objectives. So one of them is always, usually fundraising is a big part of it, but the other part of it is community outreach. And a lot of times you don't know who's attending your event if that's the first time that they're getting to know your organization or interacting with your organization. And that experience can leave them feeling like they were welcomed and included and thought of, and that it was kind of an environment that felt safe to them. And if that's the case, then when somebody needs your services, like for us, we serve survivors of sexual assault and intimate partner violence, and which unfortunately touches all parts of our community. There's nobody who's not impacted by those issues. And so when they come to our events, if they leave feeling like we're an affirming and positive organization, then they'll trust us, and that trust is important for them to reach out to us when they need our services or if they want to refer somebody they care about to us. And so that's a big part of why DEI is important in our events.
Yeah, I'm going to start with what I think for all of us is at least intuitive, I'm certain, and that is the importance of doing the homework individually as planners, as members of teams. When we do the homework, our own homework, we raise questions, sometimes uncomfortable questions, questions that allow us to engage introspection and ask, what is my relationship in the context of others? And so when planners come to the table, I would at first encourage all of us, and I think, again, we do this, do the homework, do that work that requires all of us to ask, where is my place in all of this? How can I learn more about myself in relationship to others? And you make for a better and stronger team member, I believe, when you do that. And then the other piece I would just mention real quick is when we plan our events, as we think about what that impact might be, I think it's sometimes important, very often important, for us to consider how and in what ways our programs address the ongoing issues inside the community we're attempting to serve. What are their challenges? What are their crises? What are their worries? How are they and in what ways marginalized? And is this program likely to somehow lift up, encourage, support, ally with communities that we're attempting to serve? So understanding our audience, understanding our communities.
Yeah, thank you. Umut?
Hi, Merhaba. I'm going to talk about more like conferences and workshops and what's important in there too. When we produce any type of events, or when you guys are producing any type of events, one of the biggest things that you're trying to do is connect. You have a purpose. You have something to show or something to celebrate. In that case, you want to be as much as possible to create that environment safe and secure. That comes with the inclusion. That comes with the diversity. When you're only one-sided, then those people there is going to remember that. They might not remember the food or technical problems or something. They're going to remember how they feel on that situation. So that's why it's very important to be sure that you have all the inclusion in your events.
Hello. I was going to say, from my perspective, I do celebrity, charity, corporate, social events, and for me, always knowing your client, whether it's a corporate client, usually with the corporate clients, but your social clients too, knowing where they stand in the world and the kind of vendors that you're going to bring to the table to work with them, and make sure that you do have a diverse group of vendors and that they align. Sometimes you can turn down a client if it's not going to be the right fit, and you're not, it's okay to say no. If you can't in your heart, at the end of the day, it's money. But what you live with and your values and how you want to stand up for and help spend that money and help, you know, these people spend money and help small business owners in the world, and diverse vendors that you know cultivate, like you said. I think it's super important, and you just have to, from the get-go, that's like A1 when you're getting that phone call like, hi, I would like to possibly hire you. It's a Google search, people. You can deep dive. If you can, like, here's the deal. If you can, like, stalk your ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, like, on Instagram and everything, you can go digging deep onto the people who are trying to hire you and find out, you know, where they're coming from in this world. And I think that's a great way to really just safeguard the vendors that you work with and also the kind of people that you're going to work with, and be excited about working with people who you support and, you know, are doing good in the world.
Thank you. I did want to remind everyone in the audience and everyone online that we're going to do a beginning portion of a moderated Q&A with the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to audience Q&A. So if you're hearing some nuggets of gold from our panelists that trigger a question for you, keep it with you, write it down, and please join us at the end for questions. You all said a lot of incredible things, and you said words like empowered, engaged, safe. And those are words that I use to really define those three terms that are in the title of this event: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think it's really important for us to have the context of what those words mean, particularly the difference between equity and equality, because I think those get conflated a lot. And for me, I think it's important for people to know when we think about equity and equality, they have a relationship to each other. Equality, I think of as our goal, right? So the goal might be that everyone comes to the event, that they feel engaged, that they feel respected, that they feel like they belong, that they feel safe, like they have access. We want that for everybody. Everybody wants the same thing. That's equality, right? Equity is the process for how we achieve that goal. So there may be different needs, different requirements that we have to think about as planners and put into place in order to achieve that goal. So if it's an event for single parents, a single family home, there might be different things that event might need. It might be thinking about childcare at an event. And then thinking about how those decisions create an environment where people feel empowered and included. And inclusion is really about that engaged and empowered feeling, like Umut described. It's how people feel. And individually, we have the ability, based on the decisions we make, to cultivate an environment of inclusion. So my next question is really leading into that. For Troy and Umut, maybe you can speak a little bit more specifically about some examples of what equity and inclusion actually can tangibly look like within events.
There we go. It was backing up about what you just said, and it was one of those things where, again, we're always learning and growing, and I did 450 premieres at Warner Brothers back in the days, and I just recently, like, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and I love that our ASL interpreter is here, but did you guys see when Olivia Rodrigo was on the red carpet and she brought her own, I get goosebumps, she brought her own ASL interpreter on the carpet doing interviews at an awards show. Blew my mind. I have never, in 20 years of doing this, thought of that. And I just think that's, again, thinking of how to keep including other people into our events in different ways, just when we think we know that we're all doing it right and something like that comes around. It was amazing to me to see that. So thank you. And she's in but for, like what we had said before, cultivating vendors from the start, you guys, that are a diverse selection of the world we live in. I always look at talent first and foremost. And then within that, there's so many different lists out there now. Ever since, you know, things have becoming more and more prevalent in our industry after Black Lives Matter and different bringing to light so many different people who wanted to be represented in our industry. There's so much talent out there, and as event professionals, that is our duty. That is part of our job from day one, is to go out there and look and find all the different resources that would work with your events. And again, that's you knowing who's going to work with you, talent-wise, and who you can believe in, and cultivating these. And it's so, I think it's pretty easy nowadays. You look online and you see things, people are tagging events that you like, and you can dial down. I've had many people who've reached out to me via DMs, and I will respond. And I've been very excited to work with different people that I never knew about. Or if you're in corporate or nonprofit and you're dealing with gifting, again, small businesses out there in our world, whether they are beauty products and small businesses that are owned by diverse populations, these are all ways that we can support in the industries that we do by helping funnel money into small businesses out there within your events. That's another source of revenue that you can help. Again, that's you doing the research of, not just saying, great, let's go with Gap or whatever, for if you're doing bags at a event, try and find something, whatever that event is. If it's made by a specific, group of people and it supports the organization you're doing. I just think those are just smart ways and helpful ways that you can elevate in our business.
Yes, I can tag along with the specific groups of people. Let's say this. We have been doing before to in Cal Poly, like cultural commencements. There is 6 different groups that now we need to make an event, right? And the flavor of the expectations or the event is different. You need to listen to them, what they want, what they actually envisioning. If you go there and say that, okay, this is the catering list, you have cheese and fruit, and this is the 3 things that you can choose for your cocktail pro lunch, and that's not going to speak to them. Be mindful. Then when you come to those commencement events, you will see that if Chicano Latinos has a wonderful mariachi band and really great food. Muslim Students Association has their own thing in a different way. And if you don't have that food option, get out and search what they want. Get that. If it's needed to have a halal food, the answer is not supposed to be, oh, we have only cheese and fruit platters. No, just get out to that. That's how you can make those groups to feel belonged and being cared. That's how you create the awareness of these groups. When you start feeling and acting of thinking others, and then you will see the response is wonderful. And also for your events too. Never estimate the power of including something small, even for you small, but something small from something happening in the world, right? And then it might be a day to remember. It might be about their events. But that small things become such a big thing. That person will go home and say, wow, they actually appreciate me. And then the next thing you know, the same event will have another 30 people coming up because they felt good. So, thank you.
Thank you. So I heard engage diverse vendors, contractors, do your homework with who you're employing to help staff your event. Get to know your audience and see what are their needs and how you can cater your event to really speak to them so that they see themselves in your event. I think even asking questions, I always ask critical questions like, who is this event for? And what barriers might they have? What needs might they have so that I can ensure that this event is as equitable and inclusive for them? So that might mean ensuring that we have gender inclusive restroom options. And if you don't have them, saying, it's not my fault, it's the building, isn't enough. I've seen people put signs over the restrooms to signify to people that this is an inclusive space for our LGBTQ+ or gender nonconforming community. It might be the timing of your event. So asking yourself, what time is this event at, and who can come to an event? If it's at 12 noon, maybe people can take a break from work and you take their lunch to come to your event, but then are you providing food? And who might disproportionately be impacted whether your decision is yes or no? It's not just an interpreter. We've learned through COVID, having virtual options make it more accessible for people. These are all the questions that you can be asking. I talked about childcare. That's a big one. It's a conversation in so many sectors right now. But those are questions that you can be asking yourself to make an event more inclusive, especially if your goal is to reach the most diverse audience possible. And if you have a targeted audience that you're trying to reach, definitely, to Amoot's point, get to know who that is, and really be intentional about how you're designing the event. So with that, Dr. Morton, I have a question for you. Is there some low-hanging fruit that everyone can be doing that they might not even know about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And, it does, of course, insist, this low-hanging fruit, that we think, as this program is titled, think differently, think outside the box. There are people in our community who can be very helpful at the planning table who are not members of the organization. Perhaps they attend events, but they have a leadership role or they have influence in the community. Invite them in, put them at the table, ask them to participate in the planning process. Pay them occasionally, especially if, again, the situation calls for that. Focus groups. Are we still doing focus groups?
Yeah.
Focus groups, getting people around the table and asking those questions about what and how these programs impact their lives and impact their communities. Low-hanging fruit, like just being mindful of how important it is to avoid holidays or religious holidays that, sometimes obviously may complicate your calendaring, but at the same time, out of respect for difference, out of respect for individual communities, we would be mindful of that. And being able to receive in a non-defensive way feedback and being accountable. So assessment and being mindful of the importance of not only just the suggestion box idea, but actually insisting somehow that people provide the kind of feedback you need to make your programs better. So those are just a few off the top, but I think the low-hanging fruit is there, and what makes, I think, the largest difference in many ways is just to be certain the folks around the table grow that representation, because when I've attended programs that went wrong, or when I've heard about programs that didn't quite click, or there were moments where the awkwardness, appeared, I go, who was at the planning table and who wasn't? And you know the drill. And of course, apologetically, we explain that, we're working on that. In our own organization, the Diversity Coalition, San Luis Obispo County, formed, by the way, back in 2010 after 2011, after a very sad, tragic moment in Oro Grande when a black family was victimized by a hate crime, a cross burned in their front yard. People came together to support that family, and the individuals that did, some of them are recognizable names if I share them with you, decided that the need to provide support for others, marginalized, underrepresented, vulnerable communities was so important that they would stay together and continue to work on DEI issues. And out of that birthed the Diversity Coalition. I mean, that's low-hanging fruit in some ways. That's about a grassroots effort to serve and to support one another in this democracy we live in. And so I think, again, just off the top, those are a few items.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I heard too is the most low-hanging fruit, and you said this, right, is to decide to do something different, decide to be more equitable, be more inclusive, and I think always question, I don't know if this happens to you, but I always have kind of trained my brain to ask the question why every time I hear, well, we've always done it that way.
Right.
And so I think, those are some of the tactics that I heard from you is make a decision, be intentional about your actions, and do something different, because when you do, you tell a lot of people that they matter.
I can actually expand one of your points. Like Dr. Morton mentioned about the timing of the event, sometimes it's important. Yes, open up a calendar, but not just your corporations or your organization, your non-profit calendars. I'm talking about look at the local calendars, look at the county, and then look at the world calendar, like what's going on in the world. That is actually really easy to engage, right? Googling. And that's also very helpful for you to decide your event date, right? Or if you're in a purposeful day of the event, what do you need to do that day, right? Are you in the Ramadan? Are you in the another month that is important to another group? So just be mindful of that.
Thank you. My next question is for Stacy, our resident communications expert. But we get this question a lot, and it's sort of that first step of how can events reach more diverse audiences for engagement?
Sure, and some of that kind of is piggybacking off of what Dr. Morton said, but I would say one of the first ways to do that is consider, so at Lumina Alliance, when we're planning our events, we have a committee of volunteers that helps us, and we need that because they help us have more reach and get more support. And so to your point, inviting people to that committee, people who are going to be involved in the planning, who come from diverse backgrounds and who have different interests, because they're going to help you innovate in your event. I mean, they really will think of things that you wouldn't have thought of on your own. They may, if you have a specific outreach that you're trying to do, I know we're working on trying to outreach more to the Latinx community, and that's something that, it's helpful if you have people who are already connected in those communities who can help you know what media channels to reach out to, or where to send your press releases, or organizations that support that community that you might want to send your poster to for your upcoming event. So I think having diverse perspectives on your planning committee is really important. Another part of that is choosing where you're advertising and how you're advertising. If we do a lot of postering when we're about to have an event, and so placing posters where you think people are going to see them from, from communities that you're doing outreach to, or communities that you just haven't had a personal invitation to your event. Everybody wants to feel invited to an event. And so how can you make people feel invited with your communications? And then we also think a lot about the accessibility of our event when it comes to affordability. So we have a big gala, that's a big fundraiser for us, but that's $150 a ticket. And so that's definitely not accessible for a lot of families in our community. And so we also have a smaller fundraiser, but we're hosting it this October, which is a family-friendly fundraiser. And we hope to get $20 per person who registers for the fun run, but we've made that donation a suggested donation amount of $20. So some people can pay less than that, and others we expect will pay more, and we hope to average out to about $20 a ticket, but that leaves room for people to attend your event and support your event, even if they're not able to give $20 per person. And we're making kids free for that event. So I just think those types of things, when you're considering how, you're inviting people to your event, but then you want to make sure that when they get there, they're able to participate. And we got that feedback too from when we did Wine, Women, and Shoes was one of our fundraisers that we did during COVID, and it was virtual. We had an auction, and we also received feedback that our starting prices for our auction were too high when we did the survey afterwards. And that's another thing. I mean, not everybody can participate, so I think having raffles kind of gives everybody a chance to participate in the games once they're at an event. So just practical things like that is when you get the asking for feedback is crucial, and then when you get the feedback, really implementing that change and saying, yeah, you're right, when we look at this was not really accessible for everybody to participate in because we started it out too high. And I think my last one was just the programming. Pay attention to who you're putting on stage and which voices you're amplifying, and what does that look like? Do people see themselves reflected in your event and in your organization? So those are real ways that you can be intentional about being inclusive within that space.
Yeah, please add.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on something you said earlier. Thank you. You know, one of the expectations we have with our wonderful, marketing activities and the illustrations and all the things we do to get folks into the seats. And I think one of the things I found helpful is to actually get in front of the communities and the audiences that we're attempting, right, to bring to our programs. And so that means asking for just a few minutes, you know, of time at one of the meetings, whether it's a nonprofit organization, a DEI-related organization, and just talking up your program and actually right there, pressing the flesh, so to speak, and getting to know people and inviting them out. I began my career as a middle school teacher in Nashville, Tennessee, and Booker T. Washington Middle School. Hey! And you know, we would, of course, host PTA meetings, parent-teacher education meetings, or association meetings, et cetera. And sometimes, you know, in the teacher's lounge, you know, complain about a whole lot of things, but, well, they just don't come out, the parents, you know, what are we doing? We announce these programs, we have flyers all over the bulletin boards, but we didn't really get into the community enough. We really didn't knock on doors and ask folks, you know, if they were and their kids were enjoying that experience they were having at Booker T. Washington. And I think just going back to the low-hanging fruit issue, very little substitutes for the personal touch and being certain that people out there understand that as an event planner, it's not what I'll call a sterile and mechanical process. It's a relationship building process, right? And that relationship building process pays so many dividends because the people that you touch others. And you all know that adage about, you know, people may forget what you said and et cetera, but they won't forget how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about event planning, how do we make people feel? How do you feel going out the door? Are you coming back? You know, we very often invite folks back, right? And do they bring another person with them? That's a great sign if they bring somebody with them the next time. So personal touch, relationship building. Again, all of us know this intuitively. You all know this. We're speaking to an audience of professionals. So it's not like you haven't thought about these sorts of things. Some of this is just reinforcing. And I think that's, you know, important.
Yeah, that really resonates with me because I think about what I hear a lot is I translated my materials in Spanish, but the Latinx population still didn't come. And what I heard from both of you was it's not just, that's bare minimum maybe for accessibility if you're targeting a Latinx population, but I heard from you is, well, where are they gonna see that? Are we changing where we're marketing? And then what does that relationship look like with that population? And that's where I think we get from just meeting a quota of having accessible via language marketing materials to that authentic relationship and relationship in practice. So I really appreciated what you said there. Another thing, and I'm actually gonna kick this back to Troy, that I think within this conversation comes up a lot as well, is how do you avoid tokenizing the diverse communities that you're seeking to engage in your events?
For me, I touched on it a little bit before, but for me, it's always authentically and organically working with vendors who you believe in and have already, as I said, you've gone and done the work. You've already seen that they're talented, and you're the one, as the event planner and the event professional, you're the spokesperson, and you have to be a better PR person for your vendors and the different people that you are representing than anybody else, because you're going to be the voice, again, bringing the people to the table. And if you're there saying to your client, who at the end of the day, it's their money, you're just spending it, but you're the one who's advocating for them. You're going to be saying this is XYZ, why they are worth that, why no, we aren't going to go back and try and get massive discounts from these small businesses, and why you have to stand up for that and for your vendors, because they are going to come around, and those important touch points to make people feel, because the ROI on your events make people feel, and they will always, always come back and talk about your organization, the event, how that was. They'll come back and support you, especially for nonprofits. When you have those people who are coming to your galas year after year, you have to make them feel that it was special, it was something different, that you're doing something to keep bringing awareness, and then how you bring in your message throughout those events. You bring it, sometimes people go so full force and so like knocking people over the head with their message that it actually turns people off. So you actually have to do it a little more organically within the event, and showing them, you know, different ways where they're feeling the little touch points here and there, like you said. All of those little moments, like you're making me think because you're Turkish, and we were talking about Turkish chocolates, and I was just saying, like, if I had that event, I would be going to that small business in Slough and buying all those Turkish chocolates, and I would have them at everyone's dinner place setting, and you know, those kind of little touches where everyone's like, I loved that. That kind of special moment is great. But making people feel like they are not just that person of color in the room. You're using that person as a vendor so you look good for everybody. That's not what you should ever. I think tokenism is no. Authentically and organically. You do the work beforehand to be the best advocate for someone. And going real quick on the marketing thing, it made me think of, which is for the nonprofits and everybody in the room, it's very interesting because from Hollywood and marketing, working in there, every single movie you've ever seen, they always know who the players are, and they have billboards next to where those people's houses are. So every time one of those big stars has a movie, they're driving down, you know, Ventura Boulevard or down Slough or whatever. They've got that marketing material so those people can see it. So again, it's the groups of people you're trying to target, the players who, again, the money makers, the people who are you're reaching out to ask for money, for grants, for all of that kind of high price point. Find out where these people live. Know where they go. Where are they going to schools? And make sure that they are targeted. Sometimes it's just going a little bit different than, hey, this is the church that that everyone's going to because we're doing a church event today. And but no, figure out what grocery stores they go to, other places that you can really hit that will maybe help your galas and organizations for the future events that you're doing.
Yeah, I think you echoed some of what Dr. Morton said as well, that authentic relationship being key. Yeah, and I would also say not only, and I think some of you touched on it too, right? Like not only engaging diverse populations when it's diversity, equity, and inclusion related, or you're doing an event because you want to really reach a Latinx population, but then all of the tactics that you employed to get them authentically engaged, you don't employ in all of your other events. So really thinking about engaging these practices in a consistent and sustainable way to continually build that relationship and continually engage diverse populations. That's, I think, another strategy to avoid tokenizing communities, where they see themselves being engaged by you in not just one event that speaks directly to them, but in all of your events, because that's you telling them that they have a place in your events and in your organization, regardless of if it says diversity, equity, and inclusion, or if it says, you know, our Latinx population, our LGBTQ plus population, or it's Pride Month, and so we're going to now do all of the events related to our LGBTQ population, but the other 11 months out of the year, they don't see themselves in your programs or your events. So I think really thinking about that consistent and sustainable engagement, which is hard. It takes work, which leads to my next question. I'm going to see if Stacy wants to start it off. But what are the most effective ways to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion when you're facing pushback in your organization? How do you really be that catalyst for change?
Yeah, no, good question. Well, first I'll start by saying I think pushback is just another word for feedback. And I think feedback, like Dr. Morton was saying, is just really, it's a gift. It's something that's really important. And it's a key part of implementing or working with a lens of DEI in your work, and really centering that is getting feedback from lots of people in lots of ways, and you're constantly looking for feedback. So if you're getting pushback, and especially internally, I think some of our best feedback has come from staff. They care about our work, they're passionate, and they're also critical because they're inside and they know how we operate. And so we've definitely had instances of where we've gotten feedback on some past events. So Lumina Alliance is the organization that Friday's our birthday, our 1-year birthday, but we resulted from the merger of Rise and Stand Strong. So several of you guys might be familiar with those organizations. And Rise previously hosted an event called Walk a Mile in Her Shoes. And so if you're here, you might know, if you're from SLO, you might be familiar with that event. That's before I lived in SLO. But it was an event that they had that was well established. It made a lot of money. It was a good fundraiser. It had a lot of community support. But it was basically asking supporters to wear high heels and walk a mile to support survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. And we heard a lot of feedback from staff that was problematic, that it was othering to the transgender community locally, and that they felt like it was at their expense. And we also know that it also was perpetuating gender norms that on our own prevention team we were teaching were harmful to survivors, and that were increasing the stigma for male survivors or other gendered survivors to reach out to us, because we were perpetuating that stigma that only women are victims of sexual assault or domestic violence, and also that what you wear might cause you to be sexually assaulted. And so there were a lot of problems with this theme, but it was a successful event. It was really hard, and we had a lot of internal discussions on our team about what we do to change that. And in the end, we sunsetted that event in 2018. But that critical feedback came internally. It came from our staff, and it also came from the community and several community groups. And so, you have to be listening, and you have to be asking the questions, and then implementing and willing to change. It's hard to do that when you're, I think it can feel very sensitive to get critical feedback, but it also can be the biggest gift to your organization, because what we don't want is for people to not come to our organization for help and feel like they're going to be othered, or they're not going to have a sense of belonging. And we are an organization that cares about all survivors, and we're here for them. And so we wanted to make that clear, and that's why we sunsetted the event.
Thank you. It was really powerful. Did you want to add anything?
No, I just want to thank you for that comment. What did you say? Pushback is feedback.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. I mean, it is feedback,
yeah.
But you helped me there. And to use it constructively, is the goal. And so many of us experience pushback in DEI work. And, we have our own thoughts and ideas about how that ought to be carried out. And at the same time, when we get the pushback, it's feedback for me to ask, what is it I don't know about this pushback? Where is it coming from? Change is difficult, structural change especially. It's not unintentional. Inequities, they are intentional, and they've been supported and reinforced to benefit certain demographics, and those certain demographics push back in the DEI work that we do. And is it simply resistance to change? Yeah. Is it pain? Is it loss? Is it fear? Probably all of that. So to understand it and to reach out to others who are hopefully in concert with your allies who can help in an organization to have you do that work, not as a lonesome, if you will, crusader, but in concert with people who feel like, yeah, we can do better, because all of us have seen too many people sacrifice emotional health, physical health, etc., in the name, well-intentioned, in the name of making a difference and bumping up against pushback.
Yeah. Well, I think an important thing to think about too when you get pushback is where is it coming from? Because, you know, some of it can be because they are protecting a status quo. And so you really have to think about, like, is the pushback aligned with my values? Is it really like for pushing me to be who I say I want to be? You know, is it pushing me in towards our guiding principles or away from that? Because if it's something that's contrary to your values and it's keeping you back, then that's an opportunity for education with the person who's giving you that feedback. And if it does align with who you've stated you are through your mission, vision, and values, then it's something that you really need to think about critically and decide, like, even if this is hard and hard to swallow, what can I do? And even if it's steps, what's the plan? Mm-hmm. You know? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
thank
both
you.
talked about two different forms of pushback. The first one, right, if you get feedback from a community where you might have made a mistake, and how that's an opportunity for growth and enhancement. So like taking that, learning from it was the first part. And then you both transitioned into a different form of pushback that you might get internally from your organization or your coworkers as you're seeking to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you both talked about like seeking to understand where that pushback is coming from. Stacey, I really liked what you said about grounding yourself in the values. I would say not only your personal values, but your organizational values. Because often those organizational values, what I've seen in our community in SLO, say things like community, say things like belonging, say things like respect, safety, right? Those words are in there, and they're not necessarily diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they don't say safety only for XYZ population, right? And so I think those are ways to get to know your organizational values and then identify how practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion actually helps you uphold those values with the utmost of integrity. And I think the same is true for events. I was talking with Lee Johnson, who I think is in the audience, our economic development manager, actually just the other day. And what we were talking about, and I would offer it to events too, right, is not to see diversity, equity, and inclusion as a sidetrack. Like, oh, as an add-on, I'm going to do that, but to see it as a mechanism, as all the tools you've heard from our panelists today, as strategies to help you take your events from good to great. So all of the lessons that you're learning today aren't just diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, but this is how you do event planning well, right? And like shifting that framework of it being an add-on to being critical and core values to make sure that you're doing your events well or you're upholding your organizational events really well. So we're almost at audience questions, so I hope people have been writing them down and are prepared to answer. Folks online, we'll have someone monitoring that too to pose some questions for us. But I'm actually going to invite Umut back into this conversation. This wasn't planned, but I know that you have an answer for it. And I'm wondering if you can just speak a little bit about what have been some of your biggest lessons that you've learned when incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion into your practices. And we'll give her a minute because I just threw her a curveball.
That's all good. That's all good. First of all, since you threw me a curveball, I'm going to just recognize everybody who's still watching me in Turkey. Say merhabalar. Yeah. What I can say is one of the rules and regulations. There is a lot of rules and regulations about like ADA and such. You need to be careful of those. One of them is that. Like, don't just say, oh, there's ADA rules, and we know it. Be mindful. And also, even if your event is small, doesn't matter, be sure that you're following those guidance. Why I'm saying this, it wasn't, I didn't do the event, but I saw a very big event to be actually later on questioned by many people who came to event with a wheelchair and didn't have the accessibility, and that was harsh, right? The other things that I learned that we need to listen. The feedback that we get in the end, try to get it in the beginning. Try to reach out to those groups in the beginning. Try to see that who can be the best person to give us some advice on different portion of those things. Like you guys said, this is not supposed to be just an add-on. You're trying to actually have that flavor in your event. In that case, if you're having an event that's for a certain group, but you don't have anybody at the planning table to represent that area, that's a good question to ask to yourself. And that person might not be in the event team, that they might be even maybe an accountant, or I don't know, you name it, a great administrative coordinator. They are awesome, right? They do so many things, by the way. But those people will give you such a good insight that instead of getting those feedbacks at a later time, you can get it up front. Other things that whenever we expanded this kind of diversity and inclusivity, which we should, right? We need to be mindful about it. I just saw that like the events increased exponentially. Because yes, that person bring the other person. They bring their family and friends. They mention about it. Word to mouth is absolutely great. And that's how you actually increase the people's expectations, as well as the, expanding your event to not just one thing, but have a lot of flavors with different things. So I guess these are the first things that's coming on my mind right now. But thank you.
Yeah, those were great. I think for me, you said a lot of really amazing things, right? Don't just trust compliance, and don't use that as an excuse for you not to ask the critical questions, and trust everybody else to be in compliance, because that's probably not the case, and you might fall into unintentional harm. And listening is always a great one. So I think you shared really amazing things, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for letting me put you on the spot. We are going to turn to audience questions here. If anybody wants to come up to the mic, feel free. I think we have a mic on both sides. Yes, great. So you can just come up to the microphone. Don't be shy, or if we have any audience ones as well. I also just want to make a note to say, like, we had just had an hour Q&A with incredible experts here, but by no means did we cover everything. So this was like not an all expansive, now you can go and say you've learned everything possible to make sure that your events are more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive, because we're a diverse people, right? That's what makes us so beautiful. And so we have so many different identities, so many different needs. You know, our undocumented population is one we didn't name today and is often left out. There's so many other things that we can talk about related to our LGBTQ plus population, our differently abled population, our neurodivergent population is one that often gets left out. So there's different strategies for all of these different communities, and to what our expert panel really said was be intentional, ask those critical questions, be curious. And receive feedback as an act of love of people telling you that they want you to be better and that they want to feel like they belong in your spaces. So I just wanted to say that as we were waiting for any audience Q&A. Is anyone going to come up? Oh, great. Andy Pease, I see, is walking up to the mic, our incredible city council member.
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation and the breadth and fabulous moderating as always, Bea. I'm wondering about the extent of trying. It's the checking of the boxes. There are so many, and so I'm wondering, in order to when there are conflicts, I guess is what I'm wondering. So, for example, I'm involved with an event, and we made an intention to do it in person because we want people to network and get to know each other and connect. But then we're not doing it online, and we're not recording it, and so that does leave some other people out. But then the concern for us was that if we provide that option, then maybe people won't be in person, we won't get that connection, which is, I feel like, so much of what we need is to be in front of each other, connecting with all of our fabulous differences. So I'm wondering if there's other examples of those kinds of like, oh, you get this, but then you don't get that. But also how to deal with that super specific one. I thought this was a great example to have kind of an enticing social network ahead of time, but still have the connection online.
Great question. Do any of our panelists want to take that? Stacy, maybe? I feel like your brain is percolating.
I'm just thinking about it and thinking that I guess you really have to think about the goal of the event and what the purpose is and what because you can't incorporate every idea into every event, right? And so some events just may make more sense in person. I don't know what that event specifically was. I think when you can make it hybrid, that's awesome. I feel like I know I appreciate it when I'm working, and sometimes I prefer to go in person, but when I can't make it, it's really nice to be able to log in online. So I think people appreciate that, and so I guess I just would say, like, I feel like DEI is really asking you to think about how your choices impact people and how it's going to impact diverse audiences, but it's not prescribing something specific that you have to do, and you're not going to check off the boxes because there are no boxes. It's really just being really thoughtful and considerate of who you're asking to attend.
Yeah, we are the Diversity Coalition. We're moving back into in-person events. And the last event down at Seacrest, and by the way, the next event is in August. You can find out more at diversityslow.org. The topic will be reparations in California. But we are doing hybrid-like events, offering, right, Zoom as well as in person. And I think, you and I were talking earlier about the wonderful addition that Zoom has provided, but the downsides too, right? Because things can go wrong. But I think just trying to figure that out is tough, and at the same time, providing options for people who are still, for understandable reasons, COVID worried and will not come out to your events. And so to continue, as I think we will, to offer what I'm calling a hybrid event, in person as well as you're doing here, as well as on Zoom. And all of the Diversity Coalition programs, by the way, Fostering Understanding programs, our speaker series, they're all recorded, and you can find them all on the website, as well as a fledgling podcast. I'll put in a plug for that, that we're attempting to get off the ground. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a tough question, but I think Stacy and Dr. Morton said it. Like, think about your goal. Don't throw everything at it. It's that, just be intentional about your goal and your outreach. And sometimes as easy as saying, this is in person, but in 2 weeks you can join us for a hybrid virtual event.
Yeah.
Could do that. I think we had a question maybe on this side. I saw someone coming up. No? Yeah, you want to? Yeah, please. Sure, I can repeat it for you. So the question was, if you're having a really large scale event where it's hard to get that feedback or data, what are some ways that you can get some insight from your attendees, like how you're doing and how you're reaching them? Is that right? Great.
I have an idea. That's very difficult when you have a wide range. I think for me, I would be hitting up all my different vendors. They're at all the different touch points throughout your event, all up and down, downtown slow. See how people were reacting, how they were, what was so busy, what was the feedback that you were hearing. That's sometimes the best, is actually hearing it firsthand, well, secondhand, if you're listening, and try and help, in your planning processes when you're doing the big meeting before giving everyone, the safety and all the talks that you're going to have, ask everyone to be very conscious. Please, this is what we would love to know from your teams of all the different vendors, food vendors, safety vendors, rentals, everything. Pay attention out there, entertainers. How were people receiving it? Did you see groups of people feel like making fun of something? Like, what was that? What were they doing? You hear people talk. Maybe that could give you some feedback that would be insightful and helpful for the following year's planning process. I never thought of that, but that's what
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Great idea.
I will add to that problem because I think that I do think that secondhand feedback and just asking people is really helpful. Another way is if you are advertising the event in certain ways, maybe online, maybe you do email, that you follow up in those same channels with the ask for the feedback via a survey or something like that. And I know for us, we've had a lot of success getting feedback after our events because we incentivize them really quickly after the event. We say by this Friday, you know, if you can submit the feedback on this form, then you'll be entered into a raffle to get 3 bottles of wine. That's what we did this last year, and we had like 50 people submit the feedback within the first week of the event. So I feel like that our community is really motivated by wine, but you might find something else. Yeah, might find something else that works for it, but know your audience. And we had really good results from that.
And it's okay if you're not motivated by wine, too.
Yeah, it's okay if you're not, just fruit basket or something.
Yeah. Thank you. Awesome. That was a really great question. I would also say sometimes look at your own team and your own circles and see if any of them have feedback for you. I don't know if any of you, I've had my team help me put on an event and then would be like, I'll never go to that event. And then I'm like, oh, tell me more, right? Like sometimes looking at your own circles and seeing if they have insight to say, but super awesome feedback.
Something else that you just made me think of, because I know this from a big planner, a friend of mine, and they have, maybe again going back to that feedback, set up an email address for downtownslow@gmail.com. You give it to all the vendors, and as they're going throughout the event, shoot the email out like, hey, I heard this, boom, 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 and it hits that inbox, and that's just exclusively your feedback inbox. And so everybody's like in the real moment, because sometimes we do an event over a weekend, 3 days of events, you're exhausted, then let's download, and you forget some of those moments. That might be something that's more like in real time, like we text so fast as it is. Maybe there's a great text app out there that you can, like, everything is funneled into, you know, one hub, and maybe that's like real time marketing feedback.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to go to our last audience question before.
Check. Hello.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Sorry. Thank you all for speaking today. And I just wanted to ask basically about the DEI in general. So in the summer of 2020, we saw an uprising for the movement of Black Lives in response to the murder of George Floyd. And that brought millions of people out into the streets who were demanding more substantive change instead of what is usually offered by institutions that tend to fall more along the lines of more training for police. And many people were demanding, in fact, defunding of the police and giving that billions of dollars to fund our communities instead. And what happened in the wake of that was, instead of a lot of the more substantive change that was being called for, is we saw democratic leadership virtue signal by kneeling with kente cloth, while at the same time choosing to give billions of dollars to the Capitol Police and to the military. And institutions such as the military and the CIA chose to laud themselves by saying that they have opened up their institutions to more diverse groups of people, with no mention of the fact that those institutions themselves are responsible for a preponderance of the violence and immiseration that is exported by the US to other nations, and with no mention of the fact that those institutions are also responsible for a great amount of the carbon emissions that are hastening the climate catastrophe. So the question is, how do we, on the one hand, ensure that people who have suffered both historical and present oppression are able to have an equal footing and say in the society, while at the same time guarding against those very systems of oppression of co-opting people based on their racial and gender identities into those institutions as a way to give legitimacy to that oppression?
That's a big question. And an important one, and I'm going to jump in, if that's okay with the panel, and then I'll invite everyone else if they have anything to add. I think what you're talking about too is big things like systemic and institutional oppression, and I want to acknowledge that everybody in this room may sit at different levels of power and privilege in relationship to your ability to move the needle systemically and institutionally. And so I think if you're in a position here where you are in that place to make institutional and organizational and systemic decisions that are going to have impacts on the types of institutional oppression that you're speaking to, I think ask yourself that question and what decisions are you making? If you're here and you're saying to yourself, I don't know how to make institutional or systemic level, think about yourself as an individual and your locuses of influence and power and what you can do. So whether you're an event planner and you're making an impact on how those who have been historically marginalized feel in a space, particularly in a predominantly white space, like this one, like this city, that has an impact because that also empowers those historically marginalized people to feel like they can be in this space. And existing in spaces for historically marginalized people is an act of resistance and resilience in itself. So if you're here because you run a company or a firm, thinking about the culture and environment in which you're creating for your company or your firm, so that those who are historically marginalized can not only exist, but can thrive, can be promoted, can not just come and be recruited into your company, but retire from your company. So I think that's such a huge question, and I think it's important for each of us to identify what our positional role is in creating a larger cultural, communal, and systemic shift within that, because we all have different influences and we all have different locuses of power and privilege. So that would be my response. I want to invite the panel if there's anything you feel like you'd like to add.
I can add one thing. We do all have local government as well as state government. Be an ally. Being an ally is great. Be an ally, but also take an action. When you choose, when you vote for your local government, state government, be mindful who's actually standing for those rights that you think that we need and we want, right? So that's one of the things.
Yeah, activated allyship, consistent allyship, I think is definitely important. And then to your point, sustained urgency. Right now, I would say many of us feel an urgency when we're thinking about reproductive freedom in this country. When George Floyd's murder became a national flashpoint and the national backdrop for diversity, equity, and inclusion in this country, we felt an urgency. Have sustained urgency in between those moments that make you feel like you need to make a difference. Because the sustained urgency is what we need in between those moments.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
No, just very quickly. You chose an easy target, hypocrisy. And so that, is evident in so much of what ails us today, whether it's Supreme Court decisions or issues around gun rights, quote unquote, or voting rights. And you find that hypocrisy all over the place on every end of the political spectrum. The easy answer, of course, is we have to vote, we have to continue to vote, we have to continue to lobby, we have to continue to go to places like Sacramento and DC and other places and make our voices heard. And we have to listen as well to people who have been, for a long while now, trying as best they could to explain that prior to George Floyd's murder and so many others, Breonna and others, we have lived too long in a country over the last several decades where this level of hypocrisy unfortunately can debilitate us as well. So too many of us are a little bit despondent, a little bit frustrated, and more than a little bit depressed at times. But I would just say, continue as we saw in those activist moments a summer or two ago, and in Washington as folks are out in front of the Supreme Court, and throughout this community, whether it's the Women's March or whether it's Pride Fest or whether it's the nonprofits that are doing good DEI work. Collectively, we are stronger, and we talked about that a little bit too yesterday and in our planning, that we have a lot of great work going on in the county, and I would just close in saying we need to continue to find ways to behave and act collectively, because we are in the same vineyard, doing this work, and unfortunately, too often, we're a bit fragmented. So thank you for that question or that comment. Very important.
Thank you. Do I have time for one more audience question? Okay, I think we had one on this side as our last one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for your time and your work. I guess my question is, if you have insight or advice to organizations that are working as low budget, maybe grassroots organizations, campaigns, efforts within the community that are serving historically marginalized groups. And we talked a lot about like bringing people to the table that you want ingrained in that work without putting the burden and the labor on the very people that you're trying to serve. And I think sometimes that answer might be pay them, and then maybe that's a starting place. And yet so many of those groups are grassroots groups, fully, purely volunteer, operating with minimal resources. So how can we bring people in, have it be led, and empowering the people all together collectively as community to meet our common challenges without putting additional labor on the very people we're trying to alleviate the burden from?
Great question.
I think one of the things is be mindful. There's a lot of grants and fundings that you might be able to apply and get that you don't even know. Lots of research. Sometimes you have local fundings, the grants as well. But I hear you. When we have group of people trying to do stuff and nobody is getting paid, and then the whole burden can be really heavy. How you do that, then you try to spread that work in a sense and try to engage and try to recruit new people. If you have an event, that recurring event, and you're literally inviting the same kind of volunteers, then now try to almost educate the next level volunteers that can take the lead on those events. So then it's not just one person doing over and over and everything. It's more like you have lots of different people, and one is learning this year, and next year they're gonna execute. But be open up also even in your events. Are you actually interested to be part of our next year's event? Ask those questions, and people normally delightful to answer. If I go to an event and if I like it, if I don't know, they are actually asking for a professional or personal opinion, I wouldn't give them, right? But if somebody says, this is a great event for, let's say, Middle Eastern cultures, would you like to be part of next year? I would be like, yes, check mark, kinda,
Yeah. I think asking important questions of the groups you're trying to engage are key strategies. I think even asking somebody, do you have capacity to be engaged? It's something so simple, but I can't tell you how often I've been invited into something just to give my feedback or to give my my opinion or my insight on something, and then by the time I've left, they've asked me if I wanted to do 6 other things for the program. And most folks who hold marginalized identities feel, and I will just speak for myself, I feel a responsibility to serve my community and to serve efforts that advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, so it's not easy to say no. But if someone was to say, do you have capacity for this? We have other staff who can help support this. It would give me the opportunity to say no, and also signify to me that they recognize the capacity levels of marginalized people within this community. So I think being intentional, listening to people, and then also not assuming, right? Not assuming from your place of potential privilege. Privilege is not a bad thing, but not assuming from your place of privilege that everyone has the capacity to show up and serve, not just as a representative of their community, not just of someone who's going to give you insight and feedback, but as someone who might want to be authentically engaged in your event. So not making those assumptions, I think, is really important, and continue to do the work yourself. So I really want to thank our panel. I think we're just at time here. I want to thank all of the audience, both in person and online, for being here today and for your critical questions. I wanted to do one final plug because Umut mentioned grants. Molly mentioned in the very beginning there will be grants from our promotional coordinating committee that will be giving grants to events. Also, our diversity, equity, and inclusion high impact grants for the city go live July 5th. So there are resources within the city to support this work. Thank you to our incredible panel for sharing your expertise and your vast experiences with our community. I hope all of you are feeling inspired and motivated to make changes to help further our community's diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. This work is vital to the health and vibrancy of our community, and it takes every one of us to make this happen. This truly is just being here is step one. What you do after you leave here is the work that our community desperately needs and hopes to see from all of you.